Welcome to the Developers Who Test podcast, a podcast for developers who embrace test automation so they can ship better quality software faster and have more fun doing it. We're speaking today with Lisa Crispin. Lisa Crispin is the co-founder of the Agile Testing Fellowship. She literally wrote the book on Agile testing, and since then, she's provided consulting, coaching, and training to numerous teams, helping them identify and address their biggest challenges in testing and quality. Welcome to the Developers Who Test podcast, Lisa.
Thanks, Chris. I'm honored to be here. And by the way, co-wrote books. Certainly didn't do it by myself. So Janet Gregory is my partner in crime for many things.
Yeah. So, it's hard to believe, but it's been 22 years since you co-wrote Testing Extreme Programming.
I know.
With
And
Tip House.
it's the 15-year anniversary of Agile Testing, and 10 years for more Agile Testing, and 5 years for Agile Testing Condensed, and 1 year for Holistic Testing. So we have lots of anniversaries to celebrate.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I was fortunate enough to work for a company that was doing extreme programming back in 2006. And one of the things that we did on a regular basis, every Friday afternoon, we had a little bit of personal development time where the expectation was, pick up a book and go learn something, try writing some code that you haven't written before. And so I remember seeing your book on the bookshelf and saying, hey, what is that? Grabbing a beanbag and taking a read. And have to say that, if I hadn't done that, I kind of wonder if I wouldn't have gone down the path that I did. So it's really cool to have you on the show, and definitely appreciate what you've done here. So
it's so nice to hear that. We wrote the books because, we were kind of learning, especially testing extreme programming. Janet and I were kind of learning the hard way, and I co-wrote that book with Tip House, but Janet helped us. And we thought there are going to be so many problems to solve. And so let's share the ones we've solved. And then everybody can not have to make those mistakes, and we can all move together to solve the rest of the problems. And also being able to, people we know all around the world, to find out what they're doing and share their experiences as well. Because I think one of the things people really like about the Agile Testing and more Agile Testing books is the many sidebars we have with people talking about their team and their area of expertise and what they did. And people love to learn from those real life experiences.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah. So I guess I want to start with, a lot has changed since the mid 2000s. At the time, Agile was, pretty much hot off the presses, extreme programming, new concept. And so we've seen a lot of change in the industry through the adoption of Agile, the push towards DevOps, very recently, much bigger push towards AI. So I'm wondering, how have you seen testing and QA change during this time?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's interesting because I think a lot of the principles remain the same. A lot of the values remain the same, but definitely the tools we have available for our toolbox are changing. And I think, things have evolved, and there's been a lot of, to give an example, when the extreme programming started out in the 2000, those initial publications by Kent Beck, Ron Jeffries, and all these awesome people talked all about testing and quality, which is what got me excited. But they didn't mention testers. And so, and if everybody on the team is testing, why do you need a dedicated tester? So there was all that questioning that I don't know that it's gone away, but certainly we found our place and found ways we could contribute. And I think the Agile community acknowledged that. But at the same time, there have been a lot of people who are selling their services or selling their products, and even people who say, well, if you're doing extreme programming practices, you don't really need professional testers, so just get rid of all your testers. And or people who'll say, oh, use our automation tool and get rid of all your testers. So that's happened a lot over the years. And also, I just feel like the role of testers and how we contribute has had this shift. Now, not everywhere, because it's, there's like the advanced guard, and then there's a huge mass trailing behind. But I think if you look things like Alan Page and Brent Jensen's modern testing principles, I think those are really a good summary of how is the role of testing going to change, and is
Mhm.
changing already in a lot of companies. We are consultants. We are helping the rest of the team learn the testing skills they need to learn, because testing is an activity that occurs. Testing activities occur all the way through the whole development life cycle, that
Mhm.
infinite loop, and lots of people have to be involved at different points there, and nobody can do it all. And we have to share those skills and collaborate to solve those problems and come up with strategies that work for us. And um, we have a lot more tools at our disposal, which is great. And that means we have to change our strategies and change how we work. And the time that those tools save us, how can we use that time better and smarter? And I think there's also, as testers, we were used as a safety net, and we were allowed to be quality police, 30 years ago. Because people didn't want to think about testing. Like, we'll throw that over the wall to testers and they'll fix it. And now people are realizing, well, we can build quality in, and that safety net idea is not necessarily the best one. Um, and if you go up to the executive level, they don't know about testing. They don't care about testing.
Mhm.
The customers certainly don't care about testing. They care that they have a quality product, and they're seeing it from a completely different perspective. They're seeing the system as a whole.
Mhm.
So we have to adapt to that and be realistic about it.
Yeah. Do you feel like companies today have gotten it right, so to speak,
Well, a
or?
few have, but most have not. you
Yeah, I'm
know?
just thinking, back to the dream of what we thought software development was going to look like 20 years ago, or agile, and then now you fast forward today to how companies have adopted it and the practices they're using. Uh, and I always think back to, just from personal experiences, all of the things that go wrong in my daily life, like. I tried to connect to the Bluetooth in my car and it disconnects. My computer still crashes like multiple times per day. And, uh, I don't know why it crashes. It just crashes and has to reboot. And it feels like we've possibly just gotten used to failures or low quality in the apps that we use, the websites we interact with. And so I'm wondering, has the software industry gotten it right, so to speak, or do we still have a long way to go?
It's interesting because certainly we've, in the last 20 years, we've all gotten used to using products like Facebook that are free, and they're giving us value, and we tolerate the bugs. But a big enterprise company that is using
Mm.
your software as a service, and it causes problems and costs them thousands and thousands of dollars a minute while it's not working.
Mhm.
That's a whole different paradigm. And I think we can look at the state of DevOps survey and the reports from that over the years and see there has been progress.
Mhm.
There are more and more teams that fit into their high performing category. And that doesn't just include, their lead time and their, response time to failure, and their failure rate, change failure rate, and things like that. Those are important measurements, but it also includes people's well-being.
Mm.
I mean, mentioning you mentioned having fun doing our job, and that's really important. And reducing burnout and things like that is so critical. So we want our customers to be happy, and we want our software development delivery teams to be happy. And
Mm.
I do feel like that is changing, but I think it's very slow, and I think most teams are in a world of hurt. But
Mm.
it's interesting because today I do see more teams that have adopted basically the XP practices. They're doing test-driven development, they're doing continuous integration, they're even doing continuous delivery, and they're doing a really good job, but they're still getting a lot of production issues. Why is that? Well,
Mhm.
a lot of times they'll say, well, it's not really a bug, it's a missed requirement. Well, in what way do you not think that's a problem?
Mhm.
And when you have teams with no professional testers, they may know to do exploratory testing. They're probably great at test automation, whether I've worked with teams where the developers did all the test automation, and They can certainly write good production code, but they don't necessarily know how to design effective tests and effective test coverage if they're not working with testers.
Mhm.
And I'm kind of getting off on a tangent, but I've
Well,
seen those
it's
teams
a
do well. But
good tangent that's a theme for this
yeah,
podcast
but
on a regular basis. So
they don't know what they don't know if they don't
yeah.
have deep testing skills. We
Mhm.
know testing's a huge area, and if you know, it's like, oh, we know we should do exploratory testing. We're doing that too. But what they don't know are things that are really important, like getting that shared understanding before they start coding with what they're going to build, and what instrumentation are we going to add to our code so that we've got all the data we need, so that we can monitor production and deal with any problems that might occur, and practices like behavior driven development to get on the same page with your stakeholders, get concrete example of desired behavior, turn those into automated regression tests, help you know when you're done coding, help you keep that safety net so you can make changes with confidence. They miss a big piece of that, I think, a lot of the times,
Mhm.
and so I think we still do need testing specialists, but we still have a lot of people, even within their Scrum team. They got a cross-functional team, and they've got testers on it, and they still are throwing code over the wall to the testers.
Yeah.
But I think overall there's progress.
Today's episode of the Developers Who Test podcast is brought to you by Testery.com. Whether you're a developer who has just a handful of tests or even thousands, then your tests deserve to be running on the fastest and most reliable platform for open source testing. With AI driven insights and analytics, unparalleled parallelism, and awesome integrations, Testery enables you to get more from your tests. Check us out today at Testery.com. You've been an advocate of the holistic testing model, and that encourages doing testing in all of the different stages of the development life cycle. Uh, who do you think should be doing the testing at each of those stages? And do you feel like there are any stages that some teams overlook more than others?
Well, one reason we call it holistic is that it is the whole team is responsible for quality, and the whole team is responsible for making sure the testing activities get done when should get done. That doesn't mean everybody on the team does all the testing activities.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think it's important for the whole delivery team to come together and use that model to say, okay, well, we're going to have we're going to get an idea, feature idea from a stakeholder, and we're going to need to look at the risks for that, slice it into stories, get that shared understanding, get those examples, turn them into tests, and then we're going to deploy to an environment. Oh, now we need to do the quality attribute testing like performance, security, accessibility. We're going to get it in production. We need to be monitoring, looking at what customers are doing, learning from customer use, and all those kind of things. I think that I think the important thing I take away from it that has been helpful to me and the teams I've been on is building the relationships. So we don't necessarily have all those specialists on one delivery team. Maybe we're working with a separate platform engineering team, for example, or a separate site reliability engineering team. They may physically be or organizationally be a different team, but we need to work closely together, like one virtual team, and have those different specialists getting together
Mhm.
and involving them. I mean, the last I've mostly through my career worked full time as a tester on a team, building cool things, and just it's like, okay, we're getting ready to start on this new feature. What might we want to capture for our monitoring dashboard? Well, let's ask this platform engineer from the platform engineering team to help us. And well, we just got a new tool in. We're going to start using Datadog for this, so we don't know it very well. So that person can come and help us understand what data to capture and how to visualize it on the dashboard, and how to set up the alerts, and how to decide
Mhm.
what's the threshold to send an alert, and getting that getting that cooperation from data experts, same kind of thing. What's the best way to model this in the database? There's so many different things, and so we need to have a strategy. We need to build the relationships. We need to build, and part of that strategy is deciding, okay, at this different stage, who needs to be involved, and he needs to know about it.
Mhm. Yeah, it sounds like you're describing, more of an enablement type role where, in the more traditional approach to QA and testing, it was, developers they build the thing, they throw it over the fence to testers, they test the thing. Here, what you're describing is, the tester is helping to elaborate the business requirements, make sure that they're technical enough that they can be implemented. So, the product person might just wish for a thing, but the tester is helping it get specific enough that we can actually build the thing. It sounds like you're talking about how to come up with an approach to testing, regardless of what kind of testing it is, and making sure that we've got appropriate levels of coverage. And maybe making things consistent with the existing system. So, just because someone who's on the product team comes in, they might have only been with the company 3 months and they have a lot of wonderful ideas, but they're not familiar with how the system works across the board. That to me has always been interesting. If you take any role in the company and try to find who knows the most about the existing product, it's almost always the tester.
Yeah,
It's not the
that's really
developer, it's
true.
not the salesperson, it's not the CEO, it's not the product owner, it's the tester.
Well, it's always been my favorite thing in my jobs is learning the business domain, and then I find that my teammates are coming to me to ask, like, well, we don't know where the product owner is, but at least I could probably answer this question. And I find that a fun challenge, definitely. And a business analyst could do that too. There are a lot of different people who could do it, but um, and it's a big mindset shift. It was a big mindset shift for me when I joined my first XP team to understand that I am not the judge of quality. The customer is, and we do what the customer wants. If we
Mhm,
think they want something that's maybe not so good, we can help them, especially if it's really important to understand the business domain because we can help them they say, oh, I want this feature, this, and this. And it's like, well, 80% of what you want is pretty easy to build, but the last 20%, that's going to take us about as much time as the first 80%. Do you really want to do that second 20%? They usually go, no.
mm.
So guiding them, but they're still the ultimate judge of quality, especially the end users that are using our product. And the other big mindset shift I think is really hard for people who tested in a more traditional phase and gated approach is the focus needs to be on bug prevention. Of
Mhm,
course, we want to find any bugs that do escape out of development. But what we really want to do is keep those bugs from happening. And so that's why we need these early sessions where we do things like mind mapping, risk storming, flow diagrams, contact diagrams, state diagrams, things that help us think about what we're going to do and flush out those hidden assumptions and flush out those risks so that there are fewer unknown unknowns escaping
mhm,
into production. And again, anybody can ask those what if questions, but I find it's usually the testers that ask them.
mhm.
And
So
my
I
favorite
like how
question.
you I like how you listed a lot of things or activities that you can do that improve quality and help prevent bugs. Uh, you didn't mention a testing framework. You didn't mention uh, a, behavior driven development. Even it was just here are some activities we can do that will help us get better clarity going into the process, and that's going to result in higher quality coming out of the process. So it's interesting to think about it that way, and then also ask the question, well, is the developer the right person to be doing that if these are the
Again,
activities that
no
need to be
one
done? So
person should be doing it,
yeah.
and diversity is really important. We get really hamstrung by our unconscious biases. And so that's why pairing is so effective. That's why ensemble or mob programming, or now they call it teaming, is so
Mhm,
effective because, well, I don't have any science to back this up, but I like to think that we each have different cognitive biases.
mhm,
And so if we're working in a pair or a small group of people, you're going to see something that I'm blind to. Like maybe I know how the thing should behave and I have confirmational bias, but you're a fresh set of eyes. You haven't seen it before. You're going to notice something. And then when you notice that, I might notice something else. And if I had been doing that by myself, none of that would have happened.
mhm,
So the diversity is important too. And we can't, our systems are too complex. We got this cloud architecture, we got microservices, we just got too much going on. No one person can know enough. And so we need to build a relationship so that we're comfortable working with each other and we can jump in together. Like, let's spend 30 minutes exploring this, or let's spend 30 minutes, thinking about, let's do some exploratory testing, or think about risks, or whatever it is, or let's design our dashboard, or let's test our dashboard, or let's look at our analytics with our marketing people and see what are our customers doing with this new feature we just put out there. Um,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
it takes a village every step of the
Yeah. So
way.
you mentioned pair programming in that. And, I used to do pair programming at that extreme programming company I mentioned. And I mean, we even did it to the point where it was, uh, you know, two developers working on one computer with two keyboards and two monitors. And it was full time. Like that was the only way that we wrote code. Um, as I've gone on to different companies, what I see is more often the case. If people say they do pair programming, it's, maybe we do one or two sessions kind of as needed on a particular piece of functionality. Do you still see teams doing pair programming all the time? And if so, how would you make the business case to the rest of the company that says, is it really two developers working on one thing? Uh,
Well, I mean, obviously I was biased in looking for that, but most of the last 25 years I've worked on teams that were full-time pairing, or at least part-time pairing, or full-time ensemble programming. And I say full-time. I think it's very tiring to try to work in a pair or group more than maybe 6 hours of your workday would be tops.
mhm,
And you need individual time, and you can't necessarily do it every day. And it depends on your context. But it is hard for people to understand why it's better. But but the thing is that, yes, you're both working on one thing, but you're getting it done way faster and in way better quality. You're not going to have rework. You're not going to have bugs in production because you had two sets of eyes on it, and you prevented all those bugs together.
mhm,
It's even better in an ensemble because, ideally in an ensemble, you have not just your developers, but a tester, some business stakeholder, a product owner, maybe a designer, and maybe they're not there full time, but they can jump in at the drop of a hat. So as Woody Zool says, you have zero question queue time. So you don't run into something and go, oh, I'm not sure how that should look in the UI, or I'm not sure what the error handling for that should be, or I'm not sure what's happening in the database here. The person's right there to answer the question.
mhm.
And that saves
So,
so much
yeah,
time and
so
so much task switching.
yeah, so who would be involved in a typical ensemble session?
Well, like I say, I mean, the ideal one is maybe a developer or two, a tester. Depending on, I mean, I most of my experience is web applications, so that's definitely my bias. But the product owner or some other business stakeholder, um, maybe depending, and not necessarily all the time, but definitely at some point you want to have a platform engineer or SRE type person, operations specialist in there, to talk about the operability of your code. And it may change from day to day. And just at my last full-time job, we were a small team, like, I don't know, 8 or 9 people, and so we couldn't have everybody. But what we
Mhm,
did was we would try to have two developers and a tester, and then we used the Zoom and Slack integration so that we had a Slack channel where anybody could see who was in the Zoom and what we were working on.
mhm,
And so then if we had a question, we could say, look at the Slack channel and join us. Or if people were looking for somebody else, like could answer their question, they could jump into our Zoom. And so we have so many ways to communicate and have those lines of communication. So even if you're not doing it full time, and I as a tester, I don't want to be the driver because I'm not a coder anymore. I used to be, but I still understand coding design patterns and good practices and stuff. And most of what I do mostly is ask questions.
mhm,
And at the end of the session, I always say, how was that? Did I slow you down with all my questions? Um, And invariably they say, it was actually good to slow down because we realized we were implementing something incorrectly, or we realized we could refactor it, make something better, or we prevented a bug.
Mhm.
But it's very hard. It's very hard to convince executives who know nothing really about software quality that
Yeah,
is a good idea.
I think one of the traps that's so easy to fall into in all forms of business is the being busy versus being effective. And
Mhm.
I think that's where the math on pair programming starts to change the equation, right? Is you could imagine if we were all doing simple routine tasks, having two people would produce twice the value of having one person. And we're kind of trained, especially in business schools, to think that way, because we're coming out of this manufacturing industry mindset where
Good
that is
point.
the
Yeah.
case of,
Yeah.
if two shovels are digging a hole, it's twice as fast as one shovel. Um, and so it's that busy versus effective concept, because if two people come together and they produce a much better result, or even a much better result in a shorter period of time because they were able to collaborate on it, they might feel less busy than two people working independently in their own cubicles, but they might be more effective than. And it's hard to make a business case for that when it feels so intangible.
Yeah, they're
Um,
certainly having more fun.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
and I say that pairing maybe isn't for everybody, but yeah, they're certainly enjoying their jobs more. That's my experience.
yeah. And I could say, like, so I did pair programming. I guess it was probably about 3 years, full time, six
Nice.
hours a day pair programming. And some of the intangible benefits that I think are hard to know are things like, when somebody went on vacation, we never had a case where work didn't continue while the person was on vacation. It wasn't like, oh, we can't get back to this until they get back because we don't know what happened. Or even worse, something breaks in production and the only person who knows anything about it is somewhere else, and you got to call them and bug them during their kid's graduation or something.
That
Uh,
collective code ownership, anybody can jump
yeah.
in and work on any part of the code.
Yeah, so
It's
I
really
loved
important.
that aspect of it. I liked the fact that a peer review,
Hmm.
a peer review on a pull request didn't make as much sense in that world because you already did the peer review because two people
Exactly.
worked on it.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting
uh,
because I'm part of the Dora community, which I highly recommend to people. And we have
mm,
these lean coffees once or twice a month, and talk about things. And one of the things that so many teams struggle with is the time to merge a merge request or pull request and have the code review. That's such a bottleneck, and
mm,
it's not there if more than one person worked on the code. You might still want, maybe the product owner has to, review it, or maybe if two developers worked on it, you want to have a tester review the tests that they added, things like that. But it's still gonna be a lot less of a bottleneck, and so then your lead time and it really enhances things like continuous delivery.
mhm.
But even,
Yes.
the trouble is we humans, I've learned from Linda Rising, who is a scientist that has been a big influence on me. And our human brains are not really evolved to deal with facts and figures. We really work on values and instincts. And so even if you can give people hard data, which we have hard data from State of DevOps survey from a lot of these things, that's not going to change their mind
Mhm.
because they just can't picture it. So, I mean, I try to pitch
Yeah.
things just as an experiment. Let's try this. My friend Lisi Haka, if you go to her blog, lisihaka.com, she joined the company, I think last year, beginning of last year, I think. And they weren't doing any kind of pairing or ensembling or anything. And she wrote about how she kind of stuck it in. It's like, hey, could you come and explore this piece of code with me for half an hour?
Mhm.
Or what if we got in a group and did some testing together for half an hour? And I've done that at other places too. And people get a taste of it. They don't know they're going to be pairing. They're just going to be looking at something with you, and then they're like, oh, either either they taught you something, or they learned something, or they really, wow, we found all these bugs in a really short time, or whatever it is. Then they want to do it some more because they got positive benefits out of it. And I
Mhm.
think I think the best way to introduce something like that is just do small frugal experiments. Nobody's out very much time if it didn't work. But
Yeah. Yeah, I love that idea of just these small experiments and just casually inviting people to start doing the practice. Something I've noticed in my work, so I do consulting as well, and a lot of engineering teams, they just by default want to give up the decision making on how things are built to the rest of the business.
interesting.
And sometimes they're creating a business case to justify a practice where they could have just done the practice anyway and not made a big deal out of it. And I don't think anybody would have noticed. So, like you have a pair programming team. Is the CFO of the company really standing over everybody's shoulders when they're writing code to see, are they working in pairs? Are they not working in pairs? They're probably not, right? And as
Exactly,
long
exactly.
as that team is producing, uh, you know, not necessarily more in terms of volume, but more in terms of effectiveness, more valuable code for the company that is of higher quality. If that team is producing a good result, the CFO is probably going to come and ask, what's that team doing differently? Because that team's doing such a better job than the other team in the company. They're not going
Yeah.
to go and retroactively ask you to make a business case for how you wanted to go about doing the work.
Yeah, they can also think, oh, this team has a really reliable cadence, we can depend on it, we can plan on. They'll be able to do this, when we want it and deliver it when we
Mm,
want it. So building that trust with the stakeholders is a really good way to do it.
cool. Yeah, so a big theme these days is around, and this one's been around for a while, but this is the natural fight between automated testing and manual testing. And the answer probably changes as new technologies come out. What do you think is the current sweet spot for what kind of test should be automated versus what kind of test should be manual?
Well, I mean, I think generally everything that can be automated should be automated. And I think you should start with the assumption that you're going to automate it, unless there's a good reason not to. And I really had to push that back in the early days of extreme programming because even teams doing test driven development didn't get that there were higher level tests
Mm,
that also needed to be automated. You think it's obvious, but they were not necessarily seeing it. And but I just this is where I love to use the visual models, test automation
mm,
pyramid. There's a lot of different models that people use. The band pass filter model,
mhm.
um, and have
The
a conversation
trophy.
around that, and
Yeah.
say, we're going to do this new feature. How are we going to test it? What can we test? We really want to push things down to those unit level tests are the ones we love to rate, and the ones that are fast and give us fast feedback. Do as many as we can there, and then, but well, we need to test at the service level or API level as well. And can we do things with contract testing? Do we need to do things with API testing? And if we have
Mhm,
a user interface, probably we want to automate some tests for that too. But I think we have to be conscious of the human centric testing that needs a human involved. But if we don't have the automation, we won't be able to do things like exploratory testing, accessibility testing, um, things that just
mhm.
need human eyes on it, user experience, because we won't have time.
Right. Right.
So I mean, over time, it used to be we really had to harp on that. I mean, if you've looked at testing extreme programming, we have a chapter on manual testing that says no manual testing, and we have a chapter after that saying, well, we didn't really mean that. You would obviously need to do
Yeah.
some of these human centric testing. A lot of people didn't read past that chapter. But that is the emphasis we had to put on
Yeah.
automation at all levels and for all kinds of testing because it just wasn't ingrained in people. And now, especially now with the tools we have and the frameworks we have, automation is a piece of cake compared to what it
Mm,
used to be. And teams still struggle with it, but we have a lot of better ways to go after it. And but we have to be conscious of we've got a lot of quality attributes to test. First we got to figure out which ones are most important, and that goes back to those early stages. We're going to start on something new. What are the most important quality attributes for this? What are the biggest risks? We're going to have to focus on just a few because as humans, if we try to focus on too many things, we just get paralyzed.
Mhm.
And so we really need to prioritize our testing. And so
Y-
that's all real important, but none of it works without solid test automation.
Yeah. So it feels like you're still an advocate for UI testing or what you call higher level testing. Some folks might call it automated acceptance testing or end to end testing. And I've seen some schools of thought that say, like, oh, we only need to do unit and integration testing. Uh, I call it like the unfinished pyramid. So it's like you have a testing pyramid and there's no top to it. Do you think that that's a reasonable model, or do you think teams should still have a certain number of automated tests at the UI end to end acceptance test level?
There's a certain number of percentage at each level. It's every team has to figure it out for themselves. The models are just thinking tools,
Mhm.
they're not rules. But with the advent of better user interface level testing frameworks, automation frameworks, I can't remember who did it, but a week or two ago, saw somebody who was proposing, we got the test pyramid, but we're widening out at the top because we can write UI tests that aren't fragile and that are dependable and that are delivering us value.
Mhm.
So with some of these modern tools, that may be possible in your context. I mean, I still would want to go with a minimum. People tend to end up keep adding and adding and adding, and they never delete anything, and then they end up with a bunch of flaky tests that they can't trust anyway. So why have them? But as humans, it's really hard for us to get rid of things we spent time building. And so you have to
That's-
just keep revisiting it. Are we doing the right thing? Do we have the right test at the right level? It's an ongoing. Can't solve the problem all at once. It's just an
mhm.
ongoing retrospect on how are you feeling? How are you feeling about deploying on a Friday?
Mhm.
If you're not feeling good about it, you may not have the automated test that you need.
Yeah,
And
and are you willing to deploy on a Tuesday morning as well as a Friday afternoon?
yeah, exactly,
Like, yeah.
exactly.
Um, yeah, I love that earlier in the episode you brought up how we have to take into account the customer when we determine what's the testing approach. And you specifically mentioned, we get used to services like Facebook, which are essentially free for us. And so they have millions of users performing the same activity over and over again. They can afford to have 1% of their traffic go down a new path,
Hmm.
run into issues, and if things don't work, they roll back. But then you have other companies where it's like a B2B SaaS company. Your customer might be the CFO who paid $250,000 to use your platform each year. They kind of need a different experience, and so then they need a different kind of testing. So it sounds like maybe the that's part of what the team should be talking about when they're doing their holistic approach to testing and what features they're testing is, maybe who's going to be using this.
Absolutely, absolutely. The customer's the judge of quality, so we want to think about who our customers are and at what stage is our business. If we're a startup, um, our early adopters are probably more tolerant. They're excited about our new product. They're going to be more tolerant. And one thing that can play into this is again, a technology that we have these days is that we can have observability. So we can capture enough events and data so that if anything happens in production, we can detect it right away. We can understand it right away and either roll back what change we just made or put a hot fix out there. And that, there are all kinds of great release strategies we can use, blue green deploys, canary releases, graduated rollouts. I mean, there's so many ways that we can approach this so that we can release to a tiny percentage of our customers. And maybe we pick
Mhm.
the people who are willing to be, alpha or beta users. And we have the capacity now to do that where it used to be too risky. And of course,
Mhm.
it depends on business domain and if I'm doing a software for a pacemaker, I might think differently than I would software for an online project tracking tool. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of things that go into it, but you gotta have the conversations, and we have to communicate well. Communication is, I mean, I don't know if any of these are based on science, but I've heard people say, "Oh, 80% of bugs are miscommunications or poor communication." That kind of jives with my experience. And the most effective communication involves people using a whiteboard or some visible means in addition to talking. And so that's why it's really important to use these visual models. Look what we've got, even though if we work remotely, we've got all our online whiteboards where we can collaborate real time and draw together and do sticky notes and all those things. We need to have the conversations. Nobody wants to spend all their time in meetings. So we really want to stay focused. And again, the models can help us stay focused and not get off onto tangents. Like we're talking about this specific thing right now, and let's have a work session around this, not a meeting. We're actually doing something, um, and that helps. That helps with that process.
Yeah, so a lot of what you've talked about here for improving quality is, uh, stuff that takes place early in the SDLC may not involve any writing of code even or writing of automated tests. It's just making sure everybody's on the same page of what are we building? Is it the right thing? Is it consistent with everything we've built so far? Um, so what's interesting is that used to be an entire phase in the SDLC when it was, waterfall model. We spent a lot of time on requirements and planning up front before we ever got started writing code. And then when we shifted to agile and extreme programming, those activities still needed to take place, but now it was a different set of folks, a different time period when they're happening. Do you think maybe we need to, what's the best way to ensure that enough time is spent doing planning before we get started? And what's the right amount of planning so you can still be agile, but at the same time making space in the sprints
Well, sure, we don't
for.
we don't want big design up front, right? But I think the key is working in teeny tiny chunks, and that's where people fall down. They think, well, I can't divide that down any smaller. And so early on, we need to look at a feature. We need to take out, I think one thing I learned from Jeff Patton, and who's the creator of story mapping, is do less. What can we take out of this? And then what can we use? I love story mapping because you can come up with your minimum viable product, or I like the term learning release. What is an end-to-end tiny slice of the functionality of this new feature that we're thinking about that we can put together and get feedback either from internal customers or maybe some external customers to see if we're on the right track? Or should we even keep going with it? How should we change it? Rather than let's design the whole thing and put it out there. And now, if it didn't work, we spent a lot of time on it. And teams really have to work hard to learn how to slice their product into features and their features into stories and make those stories so small. The teams I've been worked on where we were successful when we learned how to slice the stories up so that each story maybe took a day or two max, including all of the testing and test automation that we could do at the story level. Of course, some things had to wait until you had enough stories together to do like end-to-end testing. But once we learned how to do that, then we had a steady cadence and we didn't get bogged down in those early stages because we're just talking about a little piece. But you definitely have to have conversations at the product and feature level about the risks and focus yourself and do a process like story mapping or event storming to slice that down and see, okay, here's what we're going to focus on first. And let's keep the focus on that and not keep adding things to it, and learn what we need and just keep, again, it's a loop and we keep feeding back from, okay, we put that out there, we let people look at it. What change should we make yet next? And it takes a lot of discipline to do that, and it takes time to learn how to do that, and that if your management is cracking the whip, write some lines of code and get something out by this deadline, and they don't give time for learning, and if they don't build skill, if the developer's skills matrix to advance their career doesn't include these skills, things like testing, things like good techniques for planning, things like that. If that's not part of their job, they're not going to do it. So the places I've worked where the teams really became high performing were the ones where the developers didn't just need to have good developer skills; they needed good exploratory testing skills. They needed good skills with the infrastructure tools that we use for our delivery pipeline, that, just a whole variety of things. And that pays off because the team can work together and work smarter,
Mhm.
do less, and not waste time putting out things that nobody wanted. That's the most frustrating
Yeah.
thing, is to put a feature out and the customers are like, and we can know that nowadays because we have all these great analytics tools that we can
Mhm.
see exactly what our customers are doing in a user interface. And if you see that they might have gone to the page and then they were like, they navigated back off of it. So we want to make sure that we know something's a good idea before we spend a lot of time on it.
Mhm. Cool. Well, unfortunately, we're coming up on the end of our episode here, but I'd really like to thank you again. We've been talking to Lisa Crispin, author of multiple books in our space. So if you haven't checked out any of her books, highly recommend that you take a look. And also, she's the co-founder of the Agile Testing Fellowship. So please go ahead and take and check them out. So once again, really can't thank you enough for coming on the Developers Who Test podcast. Thank you for your time.
Well, thanks for having me, and thank you for spreading the joy of testing for all developers.